The unknown, a place we're all simultaneously afraid of, yet want to go. Thank you for clicking on this video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today we are going to be talking about the Australian ghost ship. Now, the mystery of this boat lies in the vacancy. The disappearance made the searchers feel that something was very eerie. By the way, I'm doing Suspect Summer all summer long, and if you want me to continue this into August, into this month, I would love to. Just let me know down below. Now let's get back to this story. So a man named Derek Batten wanted to go out sailing in 2007, and he decided to take his friend and neighbor Peter Tunstead and also Peter's brother James. They all lived in Perth in Western Australia and were pretty close friends that were about to just take a sailing trip. Derek was 56, had a wife named Jenny. Peter was 69, had a wife named Frances, and James was 63 and had a wife named Marjorie. They all flew in to the dock where they would be leaving from on April 11th, and then April 15th of 2007, they went to the dock on Arley Beach to get on Derek's boat. Derek's boat was called the Cause 2, the Cause A2. So it was taken out of the Abel Point Marina, and it was to sail around Northern Australia to Western Australia. The first leg was going to be headed towards someplace called Townsville, but the ultimate goal was Mandurah in Western Australia. But they haven't been seen in 11 years. Fishermen had seen the boat a few days later, but didn't think much of it until the Coast Guard aircraft was actually flying above on April 18th and saw that there was a boat that kind of looks like it was in distress. It was kind of drifting toward the Great Barrier Reef, and that's when they realized that somebody could be in trouble. The search involved a Navy aircraft, a coastal and island search, and an aircraft with infrared capability for searching through the night. And that was just that day. The next day there were 2 helicopters, 9 airplanes, and 2 vessels all searching for this boat. That day on April 20th, it was found drifting 88 miles away from Townsville, and the boat that Derek bought for £60,000 had a ripped sail. But the strangest part of all was that nobody was on board when it was found. Derek, Peter, and James were all gone, and once they got on board the ship, they found it even more strange because it looked like it was in perfect condition. They went below and the table looked like it had been set and ready to go. There was a half a cup of coffee on the table. The laptop was open and turned on, ready to go. There was newspapers that were open and just a few pages on the floor, and there was a pile of clothes on the bench, but everything really looked normal, like nothing strange had happened, except the fact that these men were now gone. Officials confirmed that the emergency systems like the radio and the GPS were still up and running and could have been used if in need of an emergency, but they weren't. And also the sails had been left up and one of them was shredded, and all life jackets were still on board, and so was the small boat that was still hooked. It's unknown if there was ever a little raft on board, but there was not one when they got there. But the survival equipment and the emergency beacon were still there. The search began in the water to find these men, and the GPS tracking system was taken to analyze the data and try to pinpoint an exact location that these men could have gone overboard. And also the entire boat itself was taken into Townsville to get a forensic examination. Police said that the day they left Sunday and the day after on Monday had pretty rough weather conditions at sea and that the wind was pretty bad. An expert actually said that there was a very unlikely chance that these men were still alive if they had gotten in the water, because it would have been 3 to 4 days now. But they continued searching anyway, hoping that maybe they had gotten to land somehow. But the next day at 4 p.m. the air and the water search was called off with no sign of the men anywhere. Police sergeants Bardell and Malloy actually were the ones who searched the boat in the forensic investigation, and they found some newspaper and some magazines and a wine cask on the ground that had kind of like fallen, and that is really the only sign of anything being disturbed on the entire boat. They could not find any other signs of foul play, and then when they talked to the other searchers, they realized that even that wasn't any sign of foul play, because that had happened when the boat had been towed into Townsville. So literally nothing they could find was out of sorts at all. A few butter knives were found on the floor of the kitchen, and then there were a few fishing knives that were in like a plastic container on the bench in the galley, but they didn't look like they had been used. The men had apparently been seen taking a large supply of food, 3 beer cases, a .44 caliber rifle, and 100 rounds of ammunition with them. And so the police were kind of searching to see if it was on board somewhere, and they found under Derek's bed the gun and all of the ammunition in a sealed container, and then they also found 1 single bullet in a drawer in that room, but they couldn't really decide if it was placed there by the men or not. There wasn't anything to indicate that it was or wasn't. When they analyzed the data of the GPS, they found that when they left Arley Beach that day, they were headed northeast, right where the rough waters were supposed to be that day. And then, shortly later that day, the boat was already adrift, much sooner than police thought they had disappeared. The route was put in the GPS, but that day it had already steered off the initial route. They also found footage that was filmed by James that showed that they were still on the boat at 10:05 that morning. They all looked happy. Derek was at the wheel, Peter was fishing on the stairwell, and James, of course, was filming. During the footage, a long white rope can be seen trailing behind the boat. The fenders could be seen hanging from the safety rails. The engine was not running, and a shirt and a pair of glasses that were seen in the video were not in the same place when the boat was found. James turned the camera 360 all the way around them, and you could see the entire surroundings of the boat at the time. You could see that the sea was choppy at the time, and you could hear a banter between the 3 men. Derek and James were making fun of Peter for sitting like towards the back and trying to be safe because he really couldn't swim that well. They were making fun of him. They were also talking about the threatening skies ahead that they saw that could indicate a possible storm. Although another search started on April 23rd, the bodies were still never found, and the search was called off 2 days later. On April 4th of the next year, the inquest started to decide if the men were dead, if they had been properly searched for, and just the overall circumstances surrounding the disappearance, and it was all led by Coroner Michael Barnes. 27 witnesses were asked to testify, including family, friends, searchers, anyone that could give clues about these men and their disappearance. Derek's wife Jenny testified that her husband had been around boats for 25 years and was very, very experienced. When they bought this boat, they actually took a 6-course training period for sailing and decided to take a trip themselves after that. The only problem that they had was with the propeller. It was a minor problem, and once they got back, they got it fixed. But everything other than that went completely smoothly, and her husband was very adamant on safety and following precautions at all times. She also said the original plan was for her to go on this trip with him, but he decided that it was unsafe for just 2 people to go, and that is when he asked his neighbors. And she said that once the neighbors were on board, he decided to plan for a few months and said that just to be safe, they weren't going to sail at night and they were going to stay close to the shore. Sergeant Malloy testified saying that they didn't find any evidence of foul play at the scene, although they did admit that they didn't check for fingerprints because it wasn't necessary, because he said the boat was not a crime scene. The official report ruled out foul play and a staged disappearance, although they cannot be certain how the deaths actually occurred. Then they proposed a scenario for which they thought could have happened to the men, and it said that basically in 1 hour everything went from a perfectly nice sailing day to a complete and utter disaster. They thought that possibly the men hauled in the white rope that was trailing behind them, kind of bundled it up and put it on the deck to dry. At some point, James Tunstead took off his shirt and glasses, laid it on the back seat, and there was an entangled fishing lure that was in the port side rudder. It was thought that possibly one of the men was trying to untangle that when they fell overboard. Of course, Derek was steering the ship, so once he saw that the other man fell overboard, his brother went, but Derek realized he had to lower the sails before he could go help himself. It's possible that when he left the wheel, a wind kind of moved the boat and something came and hit Derek and actually swung him off the side of the boat as well. Though where the life ring would have been, there was actually a ring from a coffee mug sitting right next to it. Since the boat was at a speed of 50 kilometers per second at that time, it would have been out of reach within seconds of the men who fell into the water. The third man, if still on board at that time, could have jumped in to try to save them or could have fallen off himself, but there was pretty much no chance of anyone getting back on board once they fell off. None of them were amazing swimmers. The sea was choppy, and within a matter of minutes, they would have become exhausted and sunken beneath the waves. But not everyone believes this, and with such a strange case, there's of course going to be theories and people trying to debunk those theories. Just like the theory of the bad weather that threw them overboard. Some do believe this, but some say that that's kind of strange considering that the inside of the cabin was completely undisturbed and that the stuff even on the top of the boat would have been moved. There was fishing lines, there was laundry like swung over the side, and none of it seemed disturbed at all, which would be strange if the weather was that bad that it threw them overboard. Then the possibility of someone being involved came into play when they saw that the fenders were out. The fender of the boat is a plastic cylinder or tire that's hung over the side in case of somebody coming near you or you trying to get to a dock and not wanting to hit the side of the boat. Derek's knees hope hyming so that there would be no reason why they would need to put that out unless they came in contact with another boat. But the police, on the other hand, said that small boats commonly leave out their fenders just because they're small. A man named Graham Douglas talked to the men before they left because he was the one that sold Derek the boat. He said that they seemed very anxious and nervous but excited to start. They already had to postpone the trip one time because of bad weather and that they weren't really understanding the GPS system. When Graham saw that they were so nervous, he said, "If you're not ready, don't go." But they obviously thought they were, or they just didn't want to listen, because they did. 1.5 hours after the boat left the dock, one of the men actually phoned his wife. And then later at 6:45 p.m., they radioed in to the volunteer operator, Ivan Orms, and then they gave him their position at George Point. They didn't seem in distress. Some believe they got stuck on a submerged bank on George Point, and when they all got out to kind of free the boat, it drifted away and left them stranded. The theory of a staged disappearance, of course, is always a possibility, but with this case, I'm just not so sure. There was never anything strange found in their transactions before or after their disappearance, and the fact that these men would just completely run away for no reason, leaving their wives, leaving their retired careers behind, just doesn't really add up. But I guess that could be why everything was left like they were in the middle of something, because they wanted it to look suspicious when really they just kind of left it there. But that could also be that other sailors came up to them at that time, and so they kind of just left everything, and then something awful happened after that. Or maybe just a freak wave came and took them away before they could sit down for dinner like they had planned. The case is still unsolved today and has been compared to the Mary Celeste disappearance in 1872. When that abandoned boat was found, they found a large supply, 6 months worth of food and water. They found thousands of barrels of alcohol, and it was abandoned among the choppy sea, but the lifeboat was missing, and so were all 10 members of the crew. No humans were found on board of that ship either, and no one on board that ship has ever been seen or heard from again. These 3 men were all retired and looking for an adventure, but unfortunately they were met with something far worse, and nobody knows exactly what. Derek, who was known to his family as Des, had been retired from 4 to 6 years and was with his wife for 30 years. They had 2 sons who were 26 and 23 at the time that he disappeared, and he left them behind. Peter was a retired small businessman. He had been married to Frances for 42 years, and they had 4 kids together. He was amazing at navigation and had just taken a course on first aid before they left. James, who was known as Jim or Jimmy, had been married to Marjorie for 44 years. They had 5 children, and he was a self-employed truck driver. All 3 men seemed to be hardworking family men who deserved to be found. So what do you think happened to them? Do you think that it was just a matter of the sea that took their lives away, or do you think that something far darker and much more of foul play was involved? All I know is that my heart goes out to their families that have to go without knowing what had happened, and I truly hope that they have found peace within them as much as they can. But you let me know down below, what do you think happened to Derek, James, and Peter? And if you want me to continue Suspect Summer, make sure to thumbs up and let me know so I know that you guys are liking it and wanting me to do more. Please remember, with all of this dark content, that you have the power to either succumb to the darkness or choose to brighten it. I'll let you guys go. Bye. I wonder if the point of going to the unknown is knowing you may never go home.